You're going to avoid Protestant rightism with this argument. So let's take a look at Paul and what he actually did.
Describe your style for somebody unfamiliar with your work.
I think one of the things is I am a maximalist.
No, not exactly. And we over here prefer to be accurate instead of right.
Paintings kind of start out simple, and then I just sometimes can't stop. But I usually have an idea in my head of a concept of what I'm going to do, and then I just let the process take me to wherever it goes, which is kind of cool because every accident turns into kind of a cool opportunity.
There was no separation of church and state. Gosh, I wish Christians could understand this. And back in the day, Rome didn't care what you believed. Roman law didn't give a shit what you believed. This is why Christians are obsessed with belief. They cared what you did. So Roman law forced public ritual compliance.
Uncomfortable position, and the question is how far does he take it?
Okay? You had to check the checklist to be a good citizen. Does that make sense?
Johnson really believes. I mean, what the f? I mean, I can't believe that we do this.
You don't really think that you were going to get through this without being punished now, did you?
Hi, and welcome to our Bible study channel.
Energy. Energy. You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. Love to all those in the session. All of those who are listening. Don't miss the message, judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy. Energy.
These are videos that go pretty in depth. First thing you should probably do is pause and read our 12 rules for reading biblical text. And if you don't like the 12 rules or you don't understand the 12 rules, well, I don't have time to explain them all. Go back to the book that I wrote and uploaded on this channel, which takes you through the entire arc and how we made these quote-unquote 12 rules as a framework of what we found after 7 years digging meticulously and carefully through the text. So if you're confused, go do that. If I refer back, well, that's probably because we actually post these things in order. So they're all done in series. And if you jump in at the middle of a series without any schema or background knowledge, and you get all pissed off, well, that's also not our problem. This is a group where we go line by line, scroll by scroll through the text. Warning, we are not language sensitive, so if you can't handle some cussing, it's not the place for you. We also do not endorse nor approve of pretty much any mainstream theology. So if you're looking for that, also definitely not the place for you. We do a video about the characters that we use in our Bible study series. And the reason we do this is sort of so that they can kind of get in your head. So we do have a video explaining why we chose the people we chose and how their sort of energy characteristics go along with the biblical characters to modernize it for people so they know what the heck we're reading. Clearly, the Roman Church was not doing their job and looking for the lost sheep of the reunited House of David. So that's what we're doing, okay? We're taking that away from them because they screwed it up. The brilliant rabbis also down there in Babylon are also not looking for the lost sheep of the reunited kingdom of David. So you're not going to hear, let's follow Rome. And you're not going to hear, let's follow the rabbis on this channel. Because, sorry, not sorry, but the Bible wasn't actually written for the corrupt Levitical priesthood post-Babylon and Persia to read it through their little janky books. And it also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of pagan 4th century church fathers. So we're not doing that either. You guys can both have a seat. Oddly enough, the Bible also wasn't written to be read through the eyes of some dumbass scholars with pieces of paper that say they're smarter than everyone, but have never seen a Davidic covenant in their life. Not written for them either. You know who it's written for? It's written for the reunited house of David, who are actually in covenant and are actually the sheep. That's who it's written for. That's why nobody else can understand what the heck's going on. What you are going to hear is what you're supposed to hear, which is, let's follow the king. And let's get started.
So, we are going to war.
Hello, welcome back. Here we go. Okay, I was not looking forward to posting this. So I stalled. I feel like I've been gone for a really long time. But this is a mess, you guys, and this is not a popular thing to look at because it talks about the Sabbath. And people get extraordinarily militant about the Sabbath, especially if they're countering Saul of Tarsus. But let's just go, because we are on Luke 6. And before we really dig in, I just want to give this reminder list that as we read through Luke, really slowly, we're looking for original sin that Christians can't define, sin so it becomes everything they don't like. And Jesus is supposed to take all of this sin upon himself. He lived a perfect life to be qualified for substitutionary atonement, so he is a God-man. You will burn in hell, and salvation is a gift, unless you get salvation, which is a gift. You don't have to obey. You don't have to follow him. You can do nothing, but you should obey, but you don't have to. Just have faith, just have belief, because the whole kingdom runs on grace. There are no works, and that includes obedience, because works and obedience are the same now, and that's what we're looking for. And thus far, we haven't found any of that, and we're all the way up to Luke 6. You know what? We should add to this. Matter of fact, can I add something to this? Can I add to this? I want to add to this, Jesus is Jewish. Let's add that, right? Okay, we'll add that for the next time we take a look at our list. And we also established that so far we have a Davidic heir, right? A patriarchal bloodline Davidic heir. And a mixed bag of apostles from all over the fucking place. And we are way the hell up here in the Galilee at the very tippy top, which is actually closer to Phoenicia, and makes sense because Jesus announced in Nazareth that he's going to Aram. Remember that? He's going to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, like Elisha did, which was Aram. Okay. So we know we have a mixed bag of apostles from all different tribes of Israel working here. Okay. And we're really far away from the Washington, D.C. of Jerusalem, which is separate from Ephrath or Ephrathah, which is Bethlehem, which is where his DNA lineage comes from, but not necessarily his birthplace. That's where we are. That's where we are, and we're just on Luke 6. Let's see what else we can blow out of the water today. So Luke 6 is going to be kind of a big agenda. We're actually doing this in 2 segments. So we've got Luke 6:1. This isn't Luke 6 verse 1. Okay, this is Luke 6 segment 1. Because eventually, we'll get to a Luke 6 segment 2, which means we're not even reading the whole chapter today. Okay, we're going to go really slow through this. Today, we're just going to read verses 1 through 11. That's as far as we're getting. And we're not even going to really get into that because we need to dig into this Sabbath history a little bit here. Because people get very militant about the Sabbath, you guys. They really do. So we're going to take a look at some Sabbath issues and some claims. And we're also going to try, hopefully, to get through Paul and the Sabbath. And we'll see how both of those go. We may stop after the calendar issues if I get a little too overwhelmed. But I think we'll be able to get through Paul and Constantine today as well if we don't go too long. On our next episode, we're going to talk about David's bread. That comes up in Luke 6. We're also going to talk after that about this key of David. What in the world is the key of David? We're going to talk about the difference between the bread of the presence and bread of the harvest, which is all about Luke 6. And we've got to get to the bottom of this Son of Man thing because Jesus calls himself that 50 billion times. And we haven't dug into that yet. So now's as good a place as any. So we will have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different videos just on segment 1, which is parts Luke 6, verse 1 through 11. That's just that. And we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes, guys. All right. So looking at Sabbath issues. We're going to read this. We phase 1 here. We come up with a Codex Bezae and a Dead Sea Scroll rabbit hole. I don't think we're going to go all the way down those rabbit holes. We are going to throw some questions out, and we're going to basically say, put a pin in that. And we will probably get back to these in our Mayhem series, which we always talk about and never post, right? But these 2 things, I don't want to take us too far off into the history of these things because it's going to take away from Luke, right? And I'm trying to get through Luke without too many rabbit holes, but I will throw out some nuggets and tell you to put a pin in that. Phase 2, we're going to take a look at Sabbath calendars. And phase 3, so where does that leave us? And then phase 4, well, that's Paul and Constantine in Rome. So let's just start off with reading, okay? And the question I want you to think about, particularly in the context of what we learned Jesus did the last time he encountered the Pharisees in Luke 5, right? He detonated the ritual structure of healing and all of the sacrifices, and because he just send the bread, remember that one? And then he bypassed the priesthood entirely when they aligned with the Davidic heir by tearing their way through the roof, and they did that publicly. And what does that say about the priesthood covenant versus the covenant offered by the Davidic heir? So there's that. Then he called Levi, and we kind of went through that. So with that in mind, right, detonating those things about the priesthood, why were they filled with fury here? Let's check it out. And I highlighted some parts, and we may or may not talk about some of the highlighted parts today, but we will definitely get through them over our next few sessions. All right. So on a Sabbath, while he was going through the grain fields, he would be Jesus, his disciples plucked and ate some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. But some Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?" And Jesus answered them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry? He and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which isn't lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those with him. And he said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Oh, boys, there's so much here. There's a lot going on here. And the first thing is, what in the heck is he bringing up David for? Because the incident when David went in and took the priestly bread, and we're going to look at that in the future sessions, but that incident of David going in and taking the bread of the presence does not parallel to Jesus walking through the fields and working on the Sabbath. So it's like he's giving an example that doesn't really fit. And at first glance, it seems as though Jesus is comparing apples to oranges here. And we know that our king doesn't do that random shit for the sake of random shit. So there's something here with David and the bread and Jesus in the wheat field. And piecing that together is something most people don't do. They're just like, I don't know, whatever, just skip along. We've also got this Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, and it reads a lot different in the Greek, and we will touch on that. It's a lot more emphatic in the Greek, and so we'll look a little bit at that. But let's keep going. On another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was withered. And the scribes of the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath, so that they might find a reason to accuse him. I'm going to read that again. Remember what happened in Luke 5, right? He bypassed their Levitical ritual that they lied and wrote in and said, Moses said so, and he detonated that. So they can't actually get him for healing because he already exposed them in the ritual healing thing. So they can't bitch at him for healing. What they can bitch at him for is Sabbath. They haven't bitched at him about that yet, okay? So it's not necessarily just the healing piece. He already detonated them out of the water with that one. It's more about the when than the what. And what this shows is the priesthood is starting to unravel, okay? They're looking, they're watching him, and they're finding a reason to accuse him. So they can't keep making the same accusations. They got to find something new. So, like think of a little kid, right? And they're like, no, and like they keep making up excuse after excuse after excuse. And when one excuse doesn't work, they sort of change their story and come up with a different excuse. And you can see it changing in real time, right? Well, that's sort of how I see the Pharisees are spiraling out of control. And like, well, we can't yell at them about healing, but we can get them about the Sabbath. So that's kind of what they're doing. And that's why these two stories go so well together, is he's picking grain on the Sabbath or having his apostles do so. And they're also healing in the synagogue on the Sabbath. So it's sort of a Sabbath lesson that we're getting into here. But he knew what they were thinking. And he said to the man with the withered hand, come and stand here. And he rose and he stood there. And Jesus said to them, I ask you, Pharisees, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or destroy it? Which one's better on the Sabbath? Which was lawful? Either or. And after looking around at them, all he said to him was, stretch out your hand. And he did, and his hand was restored. But those Pharisees, they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. All right, we're going to stop right there. And like I said, we'll kind of get back. I sort of highlighted these for my own notes. I don't write out sermons, right? I just head. So as I'm going through, I highlight and I take notes and I make slides and I go off the cuff. So this is not, terribly pre-prepared sermon that you would get. So this is sometimes you'll see highlights just to remind myself of some things that I might want to point out. All right, so let's take a look. The first thing is in Luke 6, verse 1. We've got these two big, ugly, long Greek words, or big, beautiful Greek words, depending on how you look at them. And there's a problem here between our first word alone and then the second word you see over here with a little star, and they put those together. And it changes the meaning, and this is what people go down. A lot of people use this as a rabbit hole to go down to justify their idea of when the Sabbath is or isn't. So this is just a textual variant that you find across Greek manuscripts. And one is just describing how Jesus is moving through the grain fields. He's moving through the fields, and this is a very deliberate sort of movement. It's not just like he's like wandering through randomly. So he's deliberately moving through the harvest, if you will, okay, and getting that grain, having his, he's not collecting the harvesting grain. His disciples are in charge of collecting the grain for the harvest. So put a pin in that. But he is moving across the grain field at harvest time very deliberately, and that verb there connotates that movement. And the other, here with the star by it, is connotating time, I guess. I don't know. Some versions put them together, and this creates some challenges in translation and plenty of arguments about when the Sabbath is and what they're talking about and what time of year this was happening. So let me give you a little bit of context in case, someone starts arguing and screaming at you about this variant. You're like, what the heck does that mean? Well, some manuscripts include both of those words, okay? And it sort of reads like this. It came to pass on the second Sabbath after the first, meaning the second Sabbath after the first Sabbath, or it came to pass on the second Sabbath after the great Sabbath, that he was passing through the grain fields. So you're going to see those two together. But because of this second after the first word, a lot of modern translations just omit that because it's really rare to tie that together, and it's unclear about what the heck they were talking about. So there's a big scholar, well, I wouldn't say big, there's a minor scholar debate out there about this word, the Sabbath after the first, or the first following the second, or the second following the first, or however they say it. And there's several arguments, and one is this is a calendar nuance, and the first would be the Passover, the big one, right? The big Sabbath, because something else I don't tell you is that Passover is also a Sabbath, okay? And sometimes, or excuse me, I'm going to rephrase that. I'm going to say major holidays are also Sabbaths. So Sabbath doesn't mean certain day of the week. Sabbath means day of rest. So your holidays are also Sabbaths, regardless of the day of the week that they fall upon. And you'll see that momentarily. So it could be a calendar nuance saying the second Sabbath after the Sabbath that was the Passover, right? It could be that. It could also be some scribal attempt to clarify timing in the way the scribe wanted it to be clarified, for whatever reason. And it could also just be a copy error that, or like a glamored corruption that kind of crept into the text by whichever side and whichever political motive. And keep that in mind. Okay. So these two Greek terms. The one that we're really going to focus on is the one that's to pass through or traveling through. And this is describing how Jesus moves through those grain fields. And it's indicating that intentional, cognizant rhythm, not just dirt wandering through. So that's important. And it's important because his disciples are doing the harvesting in the field that he is strategically passing through. Okay. Put a pin in that one. I think we'll come back to that. The next word is this second first or second Sabbath after the first, or second Sabbath after the great Sabbath, or second Sabbath after the Passover, or however they want to interpret it. And people argue that this describes the timing cadence in the day of the week of the Sabbath. So they sit down with their calculators and they do all kinds of math. And this appears only in certain Greek manuscripts. And one of them, the place where it is happens to be the Codex Bezae. And oh boy, do we have people out there that love to quote the Codex Bezae as though it's like the original Bible. And it's a textual anomaly in the Codex Bezae. Now the problem becomes the Codex Bezae rabbit hole. And all I'm going to say on this right now, I think, let's go to the next one. Let's see what the next slide is. Yeah. Okay. All I'm going to say about the Codex Bezae is there are very unique Greek terms, edits, and redactions that fill the Codex Bezae. Okay. And sometimes when people get a hold of one edit or a flurry of edits that seem to point in a particular direction, they tend to say, ooh, I'm adopting this manuscript as like the original. And we're just going to take all the edits and assume that they came from the same people at the same time in the same place for the same reasons. You can't do that. Let me give an example. One of the reasons a lot of anti-Paulians love the Codex Bezae is because it exposes the edit of the virgin birth, or more specifically, it exposes the edit of this day I have begotten you. But you can't just rely on an edit in the Codex Bezae to argue your point that that is valid or not. Because this day I've begotten you, included in the Codex Bezae at Jesus' baptism, could just as easily be written in there rather than left out. Does that make sense? Like that could be, rather than being original, that could be an edit in itself, right? So you can argue that either way when something anomalous shows up in just one manuscript. So you either need to figure out edits in which who and what political motive put that edit in there and why it's different. You can't assume. You've got to find evidence that it shows up somewhere else, that it shows up earlier, if it shows up later or not. You have to look at the political motivations, and you also have to look at different writings of church fathers and historians. Because if they're quoting that edit from an earlier time, then you know it wasn't just slipped in then to the Codex Bezae. If they're not quoting it or referring to it at all, and this is the only place it shows up, that's a hint to a different direction. So you've really got to look at surrounding text, extra biblical text, arguments between the church fathers. So that edit about, this day begotten you at the baptism, that's not just in the Codex Vitae. That's also in arguments by church fathers referring to that quote that used to be there. So there's a whole bunch of other evidence that this was here, not just this one manuscript. But some people get a hold of an edit and then they assume all edits from that same manuscript have as much validity as that one does because it's so well documented. But that's not the case. So I'm just going to warn you that before people start falling into the trap of building doctrine upon when and how the Sabbath is, based on one edit in the Codex Vitae, you need to find other evidence to be able to justify who put the edit in there, who redacted it, who changed it, why is it there and not other places, and why does this appear? And so far, we don't have a whole lot of evidence to make those conclusions. So I'm just letting you know it's there, and I'm not claiming that which team put it there or which team left it there. We can't make those assumptions because there's not enough information currently to decide what to do with this edit. There's my warning about different quote unquote codexes. You've really got to get other information before you can figure out the motive of why it's different, right? So we don't know. The answer is we don't know. Why this matters? This matters because the Pharisees used a lunar calendar. And when I say lunar calendar, I want you to think of Islam. Okay, here's why. When I was living in Saudi, right, and they're going to start their holiday season doesn't start until they see what? The moon in a certain moon phase. And that kicks off the holiday season. So they don't have, every Wednesday or every Saturday or every Sunday. That's not how it worked in the Pharisees' time. In the Pharisees' time, they used a lunar calendar. So the Sabbath shifted based on the moon phase. Does that make sense? Okay, they brought that back from Babylon. Now, then you have this group, and we're going to call them the quote-unquote Essenes. And there's a big question mark. There's a big asterisk on that, and you'll see why at the end. But for now, we'll call them the Essenes. And they had a practice that completely rejected the lunar calendar because they claimed that the lunar method was corrupted post-Babylonian exile. So they're like, no, we're not doing the lunar shit. That's Babylonian. So right there, you're getting a different argument as to, quote unquote, when is the Sabbath? So the Essene calendar ensured that feasts and Sabbaths, okay, because feasts were Sabbaths, right? So feast Sabbaths, holiday Sabbaths, and Sabbaths always landed on the same weekdays, and it preserved the rhythm. All right. So why people disagree? Some quote-unquote Torah observant groups, and I don't even like to use the word Torah at this point because nobody knows what the Torah is. Everyone is arguing that Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. Everyone's arguing that rabbis are Torah experts. Everyone's arguing that Levitical law equals Torah law. Oral law is Torah law. Written law is Moses' law is Torah law. Spiritual Torah, like nobody knows what the fuck the Torah is. They just act like they do. But no one's out there going, what about the assholes that came back from Babylon and wrote a bunch of shit in to the first 5 books of the Bible and said, Moses said so, you have to do this. They're calling that Torah. That's not Torah. That's Babylonian shit. So I don't like using the word Torah, but we have to put it in here. So some quote unquote people who claim to follow the Torah try to reconstruct this Essene calendar. Some of them just follow the rabbis. Some of them are like, Jesus was Jewish, I'm following the rabbis. And then they go with that. Some other groups, try to reconstruct this Essene, quote unquote, calendar. And this leads to all kinds of debates, to start dates. Does it start in the spring equinox versus new moon starts? They have conflicting views on the weekly Sabbath alignment. They have variations in when the feasts are. Like, is Passover always on the Wednesday, or is Passover floating? Guys, it's a freaking nightmare. And this disagreement isn't about date. What the disagreement should be is about which rhythm anchors clarity. So I'm not arguing for either of those. And hopefully you'll see why in a minute or in a while. So what is this Essene thing, and how does that work? Well, they have certain dates, okay? The Essenes followed a 364-day solar yearly calendar. So their year was based on the solar calendar. And this year had exactly 52 weeks. So every year started on the same weekday, often, but not always, Wednesday. So Wednesday was the big New Year's kickoffs. Does that make sense? And the Sabbath fell on fixed days within each month because these dates repeat every month, creating a weekly rhythm of rest that's anchored to creation timing rather than yearly lunar sightings. But the monthly calendars themselves was lunar. The yearly calendar was solar, so it gets really screwy. So their fixed dates were always 8, 15, 22, and 25, unless it was 7, 14, 21, and 28. And you can hear arguments for both of those sets of dates. So there you go. And this has to do with when the feasts and the solar calendar kicks off. That's where we are. That argument. So we have a calendar clash with the quote-unquote Essenes versus the Pharisees. And again, not so sure it's the Essenes. If you haven't figured out by my tone, I'm not so sure that it was the Essenes to begin with, but I digress. So we've got this quote-unquote Essene Dead Sea Scroll magical solar calendar based on 364-day solar cycle, divided into 12 months of exactly 30 days for each month. And they have their seasonal adjustments in there. Feasts always fell on fixed weekdays. So the Passover was a Wednesday. This is rooted in the rhythm of creation and texts like Enoch and Jubilees, until you find out who wrote Jubilees. And then you're like, wait a minute, what? But anyways, we're not doing Jubilees right now. Many claim that this was used by Zadokite priests who rejected the Pharisaic lunar adjusted yearly calendar. Supposedly, this calendar cycle is preserved in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in Qumran writings. I'm just not convinced that the Essenes are the one that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's why. Okay. So there's this big calendar that pops out of Qumran, and everyone's like, oh, it's the Essenes. Let's do it that way. Having no fucking idea who the Essenes are. And if they even wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. But the church called them the Essenes, so we're just going with it. Because listen to Rome again. The Roman Catholic Church said the Essenes wrote it. So let's go with that. Ridiculous. So apparently, the story goes, the Essenes wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't buy that story, clearly. But people want to follow after the Essenes, and we'll talk about why. Whether they have any idea who those people were or not. But this calendar system is they were very militant about their calendar. So all of you Aaron Abke lovers out there in your woo-woo New Age oneness movement, talking about ascending like the Essenes, man. Yeah, they were militant, fucking ritualized calendar freaks. They were really into ritual. They were heavy into purity laws, and they kept calendar obsessively. So that doesn't really match with your peace-loving hippie Aaron Abke shit. But they love to pretend that the Essenes were hippies. The Essenes were not hippies. They were not hippies. But the Essenes go against the Pharisees, so there's this big debate. And everyone says, well, the Essenes wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, so we're going to do that. They're going to do that. Because somehow all the Dead Sea Scrolls, well, that has to do with Jesus. What? We'll see why in a minute. So then you have this Pharisee lunar calendar, rather than the quote-unquote Essene solar calendar. And this is where your months begin, with new moon sightings confirmed by witnesses before the court of the Sanhedrin. So they're out there with their little telescopes, kind of like Islam does before they kick off their holiday seasons. All from Babylon. So their feasts and their Sabbaths shifted during different weekdays each year. It became the dominant calendar for the temple people and later rabbinic Judaism in modern times. And why does this matter, you guys? Because modern debates over when the feast dates are, when is Passover, when is this, when is that, they stem simply from, are they following the solar calendar or the lunar calendar? And is it the solar yearly or the lunar yearly? Is it the solar monthly or the lunar monthly? It's just solar versus lunar, guys. That's what this is. Some believers now follow the quote-unquote solar-based Essene calendar, arguing for fixed weekday feasts, or else demons are going to come and eat your face off, because they have discovered it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the answer to all mysteries ever. And you have to do it that way. Like Jesus himself buried the Dead Sea Scrolls. Excuse me. Other people argue because they have not audited those janky-ass rabbis. So they run from Roman Constantine and say, you can't do it on Sunday. You have to do it on Saturday. And by the way, we're following the rabbis because the rabbis said so. So that's when they do it. And that leads to heated disagreements in the dates as well as the day of Sabbath observance. And all of these people, all of them, are claiming to be Torah observant. And the reason that they're celebrating on a certain date and or day or shifting dates and days is because their group are the Torah group. They're the ones that keep the Torah. Nobody else understands the Torah except them. So it's starting to sound a lot like denominations of Christianity fighting over the same stupid shit again. That's what we're doing. We're all claiming to be Torah observant ones, and you're wrong and we're right, and we're right back to Protestant rightism again because of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the rabbis. That's their answer. That's their answer. That's their answer. There it is. So this calendar is not about date or just about date. It needs to be about rhythm of the scroll. And I'm going to explain to you what I mean by that when we get there. I'm clicking, you guys. Telling you, people get really militant about breaking the Sabbath and what that means. And they freak because it's a commandment. And they freak because Paul jankied it. And so everyone's freaking out about the Sabbath. So first, before we get to Paul, let's go over why. Well, people assume the Essenes wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's the first assumption, because the Catholics said so. They also assume that all scrolls, all of the scrolls, are equal in value, validity, and authenticity, as well as weight. Okay? They think all the Dead Sea Scrolls all have the same weight or value, that they were written by all the same people, and they were the Essenes, and they're right. That all of those assumptions have been written into the Dead Sea Scrolls. I don't go that way. I do not go that way. We love the Dead Sea Scrolls over here. Don't get me wrong, okay? But we are not chasing a hole in the ground in Qumran and changing full doctrines on it or covenants based on it just because we can argue something that we want to argue, okay? Dr. Eisenman, bless his heart, has done a shit ton of good things, but he is not Jesus, okay? And just because Dr. Eisenman does not support Saul of Tarsus and others out there do not support Saul of Tarsus doesn't mean Eisenman's correct, okay? It makes for a fun, scholarly, interesting debate, but it doesn't mean it's accurate. And I'm referring to a book that a lot of people refer to, that these scrolls that were found in the desert are all equally valid and equally authentic. And the Essenes, quote unquote, wrote them, or the Ebian wrote them, or whoever the hell wrote them. And by the way, they were talking about Paul and how bad Paul was, so we don't like Paul. And we're doing whatever the scrolls say because we want to be like them, because the people who wrote the scrolls were Jesus people. That, guys, is taking a giant leap that isn't warranted and isn't justified. So, but, people have been taught that these people who call the Essenes wrote these scrolls, called the Dead Sea Scrolls, and or it's the Ebian, either way, and these guys out in the desert with these scrolls hidden were valid, authentic, and correct. Okay? Why do they think that, and why is that such an easy mythos to get to fall, that trap to fall into? And maybe it is. Maybe it is. What do I know? But the Dead Sea Scrolls are this mystique magnet. Okay? They're discovered in 1947, conveniently, the year before Israel, the country, was founded. Well, curious dating, isn't it? Wow, I wonder. What if there's anything in those scrolls that work to justify the Old Testament dating or something like that? Or, oh, look, right before Israel became a country, magical scrolls pop up written on sheep skin that nobody wrote on back in the day. And it just happens to have in Hebrew that matches Isaiah that we wrote 900 years later. Like, seriously? People are like, yeah, totally legit. Not so fast. But anyway, this mysterious find in a cave revealed a rigorous apocalyptic sect who seemed scriptural knowledge. Again, they were ritualistic. They were very, very purity. They were apocalyptic, and they were calendar obsessed, rule obsessed. And they were out there in the middle of the fucking desert preparing for war. These were zealots. Okay? These weren't little peaceful hippies out at a fucking, what's that fucking stupid ass? What's that stupid thing? I'm sorry if you go to this. But what's that really stupid thing I'm trying to think of out in the desert where they all drive their freaking RVs out there and they smell and they all try to act like homeless hippies for the weekend. And they always get fucked over because it rains on them and it's muddy and it's disgusting. What's that place called? Burning Man. That's it. They weren't a bunch of fucking Burning Man dudes sitting out in Jordan, okay? If you haven't been to the deserts of the Middle East, let me tell you, they're warlords. Okay? These guys were ritualized purity with their own concept. Okay? Preparing for war. That's who they were. They were ritualized. They were calendar obsessed. They were ritual obsessed. And if some dipshit from New Jersey came walking over and said, hey guys, can I join you? Like from fucking 2025, they'd be like, the fuck out of here, man. They would not accept you. Just saying. So stop trying to emulate people from history, because you found some scrolls in a cave. Okay. We need to audit a little more carefully, right? Than just our own little fantasies. That's what we need to do. We need to be careful and we need to audit things. Okay. But many modern readers got all excited and they saw them as some kind of pure, untampered, anti-establishment, proto-Christian sect. That's what they see. So they're like, we want to go back to the first century and start acting like these guys. And they must have been talking about Paul and Jesus. That's where they're jumping to from these scrolls. So this Essenes, quote unquote, who they, I believe wrongly, attributed the Dead Sea Scrolls to, became this sort of spiritual Rorschach test where they're projected as the real faithful remnant. I have a problem with that. The real faithful remnant was Davidic. Okay. They love the appeal to an alternative authority. Okay. People are very disillusioned with institutionalized religion and all their lies. And so the Essene Dead Sea Scrolls story offers mystery with hidden Middle Eastern caves and secret texts. I've been to hidden Middle Eastern caves and there ain't a whole lot of shit that's magical out there. Okay. It's a gritty, barren, terrifying desert. If you're there alone, right? If you're there with others, it's not so terrifying if you're in a caravan, but this isn't fucking Aladdin in his lamp fantasy, guys. Okay. These guys believed in ritual separation. They had extremely strict rules. Just go and introduce yourself to a nomad out there in the Saudi desert, and you'll see what I mean. And they had these very specific apocalyptic expectations. Okay. And they were preparing for war. People want clarity. And the Essene story seems to offer that. But I'm wondering, why does nobody think that these guys out in the desert weren't just a bunch of pissed off Zadokites? Remember, who got exiled from the priesthood to begin with? That would make sense, right? Or some lunatic Maccabees who also got taken over. Could be the Maccabees 2.0, right? Could be either. We don't know. And those are two very different sides of a coin. Okay? So be careful before we start assigning identity to the authors of the scrolls and assuming that all the scrolls have the same author and that all the scrolls are equally authentic and valid. Be very careful going down that rabbit hole because we just don't have enough information. All right. That being said, was Jesus an Essene? There is no direct evidence that Jesus was an Essene. Jesus actually didn't isolate himself. He engaged the crowds, cities, and synagogues. He didn't follow purity laws. He touched lepers and ate with sinners. He was not exclusionary. He was inclusive based on what we know about who he chose as apostles. So if you Essene, I'm going to say no. Jesus was more Phoenician than Essene. Sorry, okay? It doesn't add up. He did not teach Essene dualism, okay? Essenes preached dualism, guys. Jesus preached override, not withdrawal. The church links them anyways. Because they're like, oh, look, it's apocalyptic. There's a kingdom of God and a judgment. And others try to explain all of Jesus's missing years by placing him in Essene communities. But of course, he was also in Egypt, and he was also in India, and he was also in the mountains of Saudi Arabia, And I think Jesus even went to China. Okay. So according to these people who want Jesus to be everywhere, well, just pick a place. Okay. Jesus was everywhere during his missing years. And one of those places was the Essene communities. This is all speculative projection. This is not based on forensic evidence. At least not yet. But God likes to drop bombshells. So you never know what's coming up. And if anything else comes up, we reserve the right to change our opinion. So let's do a quick audit on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Much like what I said with the Codex Bezae, we've got language problems going on here. The first thing is apparently those Essenes or those Ebian that you guys love so much out there, well, it was written in multiple dialects. We've got Archaic Hebrew, quote unquote, Paleo Hebrew, quote unquote, which is all Phoenician, evolving Phoenician. We've also got Aramaic and Greek fragments. So they're just speaking everything and writing everything. Quadrilingual, because these guys, they had 4 different languages going on in this little exclusive sect. Some of the texts use extremely bizarre syntax, invented spellings, hybrid grammar. If you don't know what invented spelling is, well, you've never had a first grader, right, who spells like a basic word like clock, K-L-O-K, clock, because, or K-L-A-W-K, clock, because they're sounding it out with the letters they know. That's invented spelling, but it's not accurate, okay? So these aren't just small language issues or little scribal variances. This indicates, guys, corruption or ritual encryption. So we're going to be very careful in auditing the Dead Sea Scrolls and taking it as authentic, valid, equally authentic, equally valid, and all written by the same people who happen to be the group that we want them to be. Okay, we're not playing that game over here. We've got the material problem that some of the scrolls are written on parchment or animal skin, but some are on copper, papyrus, or linen, which indicates different time periods. And I don't mean like a couple hundred years. I mean like, some of them were written a long fucking time ago, like in, 300 BC, and some of them were written fucking yesterday. That's what this says, okay? Sheepskin wasn't the standard for everyday writing at the time. It was only ritual grade, extremely expensive, and reserved for sacred scribal encoded texts. That priesthood, telling you. So these little poor desert shepherds weren't down there writing on sheepskin in 300 BC. Sorry to break it to you. Not the case. So something wonky is afoot with the Dead Sea Scrolls, not only identifying the group that wrote them, but the scrolls themselves and what is contained in them. So they weren't just hidden. They were sealed perfectly in caves, preserved in jars, and buried like little spiritual time bombs to go off right before Rothschild Israel became a nation. And I find that timing to be oh so coincidental, should I put my tinfoil hat on. Some fragments are out of order, repetitive, or incomplete. So we're either obscuring it or we're layering it. And the calendar texts clash with temple practice. And the community rules read like override warfare preparation materials. These men were preparing for war. All right. So somebody found some scrolls, panicked, and sent in the cleanup crew, who patched the breach with duct tape and some Hebrew cosplay. Every fix always triggers a deeper glitch. Because Davidic override truth, you can't patch it in, guys. It detonates everything around it. So, now that we've cautioned about the Dead Sea Scrolls, because a lot of this calendar argument comes exactly from there. Not that the rabbis are any better. So we've got all these different groups and traditions, and believe me, there's more than this. This is just a small smattering of the Sabbath arguments. We've got Constantine in the Roman churches, which is Sunday, and this came from the Imperial Edict of 321 to align with the solar deity. This is what all Christian religions are following, except I think Seventh-day Adventists and a couple offshoots. But this is why I call all Protestants Romans. Any Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, evangelicals, all y'all are Roman. Okay? You're under the Roman umbrella. Okay? Any of you Hebrew rootsy guys, you're under Babylon with the rabbis and the Levitical priesthood and all that stuff. You're Babylon. Okay? So mainstream Christianity does all the Sunday, and this is the resurrection logic, except for your Seventh-day Adventists who take Saturday as a literal seventh day, and they claim to be Torah-aligned and anti-Rome, but they adopted Paul, adopted the Logos, adopted the Trinity, adopted all the shit from the Catholics, but they changed the day, so they're not Roman anymore. See the logic? Your Hebrew roots and Messianic folks are also celebrating on Saturday. They claim to be Torah consistent, and this is influenced by the Babylonian exile because they go from Friday night to Saturday night, night to night. Except some of your Hebrew roots are like, don't do it at night. That's Babylonian. Do it during the day. But they're on Saturday too. Then you've got your lunar Sabbath movement who do the 8th, 15th, 22nd, 29, or 7, 14, 21, 28, depending on which group you talk to. And they're doing that on a lunar monthly calendar that's based on moon phases, not fixed days. And then you've got your quote-unquote Essene / Ebian / Dead Sea Scrolls / whoever you want to attribute them to. And they go on your 364-day year fixed Sabbath. And it's an anti-Babylon calendar. There you go. And all this arguing from all these people all claim that they are correct. They are the right way to do it. Everyone else is wrong. And more than likely, you're going to burn in hell if you don't do it their way. And most of them who are not doing Sunday are throwing around the word Torah, having no idea what Torah is, and certainly not even defining what they mean when they say Torah. So there you go. There you go. There you go. Pick one. So how do we get to this, you guys? What I want to say is this whole chart that we just looked at, it's not about who's right. This chart is just thrown together to show you a forensic audit of calendar sabotage, doctrinal compromise, and the collapse of the purpose and the rhythm of the Sabbath. So I'm going to answer this question, not because I think I'm right, not because I think you're wrong, but because people are going to ask me, when do you do the Sabbath? Because they are stuck on this militant fear of getting the wrong day. So when do I take Sabbath? Well, this is where we have a tinfoil hat moment, guys. Put your tinfoil hat on for this, because to be quite honest with you, when you dig through history, we don't even know if it's fucking 2025. Never mind the month or the day. Okay? We don't even know what fucking year it is anymore. We're told that it's 2025. But is it really? We don't know. We don't know the months. We don't know the years. We don't know the days. And I'm not talking about these Satan little season they erased 700 years from the calendar, people. Okay. I'm not even going that far with my tinfoil hat. I'm just saying, take a look at the Julian and Gregorian calendar shift, where 10 to 13 days are lost, depending on the region. Okay. Take a look at northern and southern hemisphere sun and moon cycles. Uh-oh. Take a look at the Babylonian exile and how the Hebrew calendar was absorbed into this lunar solar hybrid. Was that instituted in the time of Jesus? So was Jesus following the lunar solar hybrid that all of Israel was under? Or was Jesus following his own complete different calendar? Like what? Like, how did this work? He was taking the Passover with everybody else. Like, I don't understand. He was likely following the Hebrew calendar that absorbed the lunar solar hybrid from Babylon. Likely he was keeping that calendar because that's who he was moving amongst. He wasn't out in the desert with the lunatics preparing for war that were doing the calendar different. He was doing the calendar right along with Matthew, right? Simon Peter, the guys in Jerusalem, the guys in Samaria, the guys, he wasn't isolated. So chances are he was stuck in this system of this calendar, right? That was absorbed into this lunar solar hybrid. That's probably what he was doing. And God did not strike him dead for doing that. Then we have, or not, or maybe you think he was actually functioning on a completely different calendar than everybody else in all of Judea, Samaria, and Galilee. Perhaps you think that. I don't know. Maybe he was doing both. Maybe he was doing both. I don't know. And you don't know. And nobody else out there knows either. And that's the fucking problem. We also have Roman edits. We've got Constantine's calendar reforms with the Council of Nicaea and all of their goofy-ass timekeeping. And we know the Romans added months, took away months. Like, they added the whole fucking month of August, right? Like, guys, the calendar is so fucked up, you guys. It's so fucked up. And then we've got the leap year. I mean, guys, we don't know. We don't know. We don't know. So if the calendar is corrupted, the Sabbath debates are fog loops. They're fog loops. They're not grounded. They're arguing over a date rather than arguing over how to keep the covenant within a fucked off calendar. That's what I want to know. I don't trust anyone to tell me the correct date. Are you kidding me? The Romans added fucking months, guys. They added full months onto the calendar, right? The Babylonians screwed it up too. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. So how do you keep the Sabbath within these militant date time debates? Well, personally, I'm actually on Sabbath Friday and Saturday because I'm semi-retired over here. And I'm a writer and I have the flexibility in my schedule. And when I lived in Saudi Arabia, and no, I'm not going to tell you to become Muslim, okay? I'm just saying I lived in Saudi for a good long time. And over there, the work week is Sunday through Thursday. And when I hit that schedule, something shifted. I became much closer and much more aware of my covenant at the time. Learned a lot more about it. Was more at peace. You know, the rhythm was there. And Thursday after work, you know, everyone would stop off at the grocery store and kind of stock up for the weekend or get what they needed and get their shopping done. And then you woke up on Friday and that was your family day. That was your relaxing day. But out there, when I say family day, I don't mean stress yourself out and get in a car and take road trips. I don't mean going to the bar and getting hammered. I don't mean having giant football parties and sitting in front of the TV eating Cheetos. The lifestyle there and the values there are radically different than the West. Okay. So when I say getting together with family, I want you to think of 1970s barbecue. And if you've never been to one, you don't know what I'm talking about. But extended family, aunts, uncles, sisters, brothers, coming around and sharing a meal together, loving God together. Does that make sense? It's not this sitting on the couch, mowing the lawn and watching football. And just because you're resting that day means you're connecting with God. No, they're connecting with family. Okay. Friday night is usually the night of a nice big family meal. I've been invited to a couple of those and they're wonderful. And then Saturday is sort of the even more relaxing day to kind of gear up and get ready to go back to work on Sunday. And Sunday is so Saturdays tend to be a little more personal than Fridays. And then Sunday is everyone goes back to work, but Bokara. How do I explain Bokara? Bokara is the Saudi word that means tomorrow. Meaning, we're back at work, but we're really not going to worry about it till tomorrow. So Sunday's sort of like a brain dead day at work, if you will. It doesn't feel like Monday at all. Monday in America is hectic and stressful and rushed, and everyone's recovering from their warrior weekend, right? And all their drinking and partying and game watching and running around and lawn mowing and shopping and crazy shit. Not connecting with God. Where in Saudi, by Sunday, you're so fucking relaxed and connected and aligned that you're like, well, I'm physically at work on Sunday, but none of us are actually doing anything. That was Sunday at work. And then Monday was the real day of work. And then you have Tuesday, Wednesday, and by Thursday, everyone's like, great, what are we planning for this weekend? So it was a really, really short work week based on the rhythm and the way that they lived and the things that are still important to them. Okay. Like family and God. So that's how they live, focused on God and family and close friends. So there you go. So my Sabbath looks like keeping the Saudi rhythm. And those days of the week work way better for me as a Friday and Saturday, rather than a Sunday anything. Sunday is the day where I'm doing laundry and planning things for the week and checking my emails and getting my spreadsheets ready and planning my goals for the week and sort of gearing up my brain so that on Monday I can show up at work and actually do something or not. So Sunday's sort of a reset day, a getting ready day. But Friday and Saturday are most assuredly relaxing. And Thursday night is a lot of, I want to make sure I have everything from the grocery store on Thursday because I don't want to have to run out on Saturday because I forgot the fucking cat food. This isn't a militant Jewish rabbi, you can't go do something on Saturday. It's I don't want to because I'm in the rhythm of being with my family and being with God on those days. And so that's how I see it. And I'm not a drinker. I'm not running around doing drugs. I don't like crowds. I'm highly antisocial. Don't throw me in a fucking grocery store or a mall on Saturday at noon. That's not going to happen. Okay. You're not going to find me there. You might find me at the grocery store Wednesday morning at 6 a.m., but you ain't finding me there on a Saturday. Okay. There's no Saturday at Target over here happening ever. Okay. So it's a rhythm and a connection and an alignment more than a calendar date. Because if you're trying to pin it to a calendar and think that that's going to save you, is doing it on the right day, I think you're screwed if you're mistaken. That's your belief, right? And I think you're screwed because they have damaged the calendar beyond repair. And then people are going to say, well, that sounds Pauline. Well, it isn't, because we're going to talk about what Paul actually did to the Sabbath. So all of these different groups with all of these different Sabbath arguments, some of them compelling, some of them not so much. But all of this Sabbath, what's the date, what's the time, is apologetics, okay? And I want to remind you that the word apologetics is reasoned arguments or writings that justify something, a theory or a religious doctrine. And so they're diving into apologetics. And the truth of the matter, guys, I can't tell you when the Sabbath is because we don't know. You don't know. And if they know, they're not telling us. And it is what it is. That's what it is. So we're not just studying scripture over here. We're auditing it like forensic strategists. So while others start with inherited theology, they accept these contradictions as mystery. They treat a covenant as a metaphor. That's not how we roll. We start with allegiance. We audit every contradiction. And we built a framework to strip away glamored and corrupted edits and restore covenant clarity. Unfortunately, because of the amount of fuckery that happened with the calendars by both Babylon and Rome, we simply can't answer that question for you. And you can bring 1,000 arguments to us. We've looked at most of them already. And all of them have enough holes in them for us to determine that we just don't know. We just don't know. So, supposedly, Paul got rid of the Sabbath.
Say, sorry, I'd be the one to tell you otherwise. And then, until the point where they thought that you could just kind of slide this in on a Friday at midnight and see what happened, that they're not going to do anything more.
Yeah.
That's it.
No, not exactly. And we over here prefer to be accurate instead of right. You're going to avoid Protestant rightism with this argument. So let's take a look at Paul and what he actually did.
Because they leaned on...
By the way, so I should be asking you.
I'm going to take a quick peek at Paul and the Sabbath, Constantine and the Sabbath, and the Roman pagan laws. Now, Paul did not abolish the Sabbath.
Giant thread of truth running to it. But why do you believe that they're not going to give it up?
He demoted it from a sacred covenant time, a sacred covenant way of being, a sacred covenant status or alignment, a time of alignment with God. And he switched it to optional observance. He grouped the Sabbath with pagan festivals and whatever the hell you want, food laws, and made them shadow elements of the Christ. This is not abolishing the Sabbath. It's demoting it. It's saying it doesn't matter. Throw it in with all your other, it's just another quote unquote holiday. Okay. Valentine's Day, Easter, Christmas, New Moon Festival, running around the maypole, eating that Moloch meat, sacrificing over at the Isis temple, freaking Roman Emperor's birthday, all the same. Throw the Sabbath in there. It's just another holiday. Don't let it bother you. That's what Paul did.
Oh, do you see the figures in that?
I'm seeing a bird, and it looks like there's a Mesoamerican flair to it, but I'm also seeing the all-seeing iris. So there could be kind of a Saharan Mayan fusion.
Yeah.
But that's just me trying to say stuff
I love it.
that I don't necessarily understand.
I love it. And that's the coolest part, I think, about painting is that, I started it with the kind of an intent of what it meant to me. But the cool part is if somebody else comes in and has a completely different interpretation of it. And, you realize that I think that's kind of the coolest part about.
He didn't change the day, okay? He changed the resonance and the meaning. He demoted its status. He didn't change the calendar day. This, once again, Saul of Tarsus, is compromise with pagan theology. But it wasn't Constantine replacement. So let's take a look at Paul's Sabbath verses in context. We're going to examine 3 key passages that are cited to claim Paul got rid of the Sabbath and what they actually say. In Colossians, we see, let no one judge you in food or in drink. There's that demon meat shit we've talked about all the time. Or regarding a festival or a holiday or a new moon. That's talking to the moon cycles, the dating of the calendars, right? The lunar cycles versus this, or a Sabbath, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ. So he's telling people, don't argue over calendars. Okay? New moon, holidays, festivals, food, drink, it's all the same now.
Johnson really believes. I mean, what the I mean, I can't believe that we do this over and over again.
No. I'm not telling you that observing Sabbath to align and connect with God and your covenant is remotely the same as putting on a skirt and bitching at your kids to shove everybody in the car while sticking a bagel in your face and running down to the 9 o'clock mass where your husband falls asleep, eager to get home to watch the NFL game, to listen to a preacher at the Calvary Chapel talk about Paul all day. Pat yourself on the back and tell yourself that you kept Sabbath. Those two things are not equal. Okay? And I don't care if you do it on a Sunday, a Saturday, a Friday, a Tuesday, doesn't matter. If that's how you celebrate Sabbath, you're getting it wrong. Okay? It is a rhythm, and he demoted it. He demoted it. You think running around hiding Easter eggs and shoving candy into plastic eggs has anything to do with Sabbath holiday? And that those two things should be equal. Running about with elves and mistletoe and getting drunk at holiday parties and stuffing your face with cookies and ham, that festival is the same as Sabbath. Doesn't matter. Your birthday, my birthday, Valentine's Day, Grandparents' Day, all the Hallmark holidays, throw them in. Those are all just as valid and just as important. New moon festivals, go ascend and bring your new moon water out and make sure to charge your water under the full moon for the month. All those festivals, all the same. That's what Paul did. He leveled this, he DEI'd the Sabbath. He made it all equitable, and not one is better or worse than the other. So just go ahead and do it all. He did the same thing with the Sabbath as he did with the idol meat. Don't ask, don't tell, don't worry about it.
Like, it's just, I'm just like spitting into the wind, man. Like, what's the point? Like, it is just.
In this context, Paul is addressing Gentile believers, right? Who are Israel. Remember, the Gentiles are Israel. Paul changed those words. And they're being pressured by Pharisee ritual law. So he's grouping the Sabbath with every other pagan festival, Jewish festival, Levitical festival, and all the food laws. And he's wrapping it all together and saying, don't worry about it. It's optional and non-essential. And it's just a shadow of Christ who's inside of you now. So the implication of Paul's teaching is that it's not a covenant requirement, but a symbolic observance, just the same as dancing around a maypole. And it doesn't fucking matter. That's what he did. Okay? He put fucking Valentine's Day and Sabbath keeping on the same level. He equalized them. He didn't change the calendar day. And we don't know when the calendar day was because they fucked up the calendar. So this, again, is the doctrine of Balaam, the doctrine of compromise rather than replacement. In Galatians, which I always say is the book from hell, Paul says you observe days and months and seasons and years. I'm afraid for you, lest you have labored in vain. He's actually rebuking Galatians for returning to ritual observance after receiving the Spirit of Christ. So he's telling him, don't observe special dates, times, and seasons. He's treating calendar-based observances as regression into bondage. So the Sabbath here is just lumped up with any of these other ritual cycles of the seasons, the equinox, the moons, the suns, the rituals, rather than being elevated as sacred. So he's not changing the day. He's flattening the hierarchy of importance, making Sabbath time of healing and meeting and aligning with God in the covenant of David just another day like any other day. That's what he's doing. And by the way, go ahead to the Moloch picnic and eat that too. And in Romans, one person esteems one day above another. Another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his own mind. So remember that big long chart we did? As long as you Seventh-day Adventists are convinced in your own mind that you're doing it right, then you're good. And Catholics, as long as you're convinced in your own mind that you're doing it correctly on the right day, you're good.
No, clearly.
They were just used to people just going with whatever they said.
I think that they expected backlash, and that's why they did it the way that they did it. But well, we'll see. They may be right. You know, who knows?
See that? And I've seen people, as long as you claim that you're convinced, fully convinced that the Dead Sea Scroll one is the correct one, then you're perfect. Everyone's perfect. Nobody's wrong. Do whatever you want. To each his own. He's mediating disputes between, again, Levitical and Israel. And he desacralizes the calendar. He's making observance of God's covenant Sabbath a matter of personal conviction. It's no longer a universal command, but a personal choice. This isn't changing the day. This is emotional deregulation of sacred rhythm, time, and covenant with God. And making God's doctor's appointment equal with anything else. So Constantine may have used Paul to change the day, but they're not the same move. Constantine replaced Sabbath with whatever Sabbath was, with Sunday, whenever it was. They just made it all Sunday. While Paul demoted Sabbath to optional or just as good as everything else. Constantine enforced Sunday observance, while Paul allowed freedom of observance, whatever you want, doesn't matter. Constantine did it as a political override, where Paul was engaged in theological compromise, emotional manipulation, and spiritual malpractice, according to the doctrine of Balaam. So Paul didn't change the day. He changed the meaning and the way that it's observed. And because of Paul, we're still screaming about when instead of why and how. And I think that's a mistake. We can't know when. They screwed it off too much. There's a hole in every argument, guys. I'm sorry, but there is. And to understand this, I think we need to understand a little bit about Roman law. Roman law didn't give a shit what you believed. This is why Christians are obsessed with belief, because every Christian denomination is Roman based. And back in the day, Rome didn't care what you believed. They cared what you did. So Roman law forced public ritual compliance. Okay? You had to check the checklist to be a good citizen. Does that make sense? There was no separation of church and state. Gosh, I wish Christians could understand this.
No, I not know personally, but like admirers of certain people. And I think that
Rome didn't have separation of church and state. The church was the state. The religion was the law. So this legal framework enabled a shift from covenant obedience, what you did in the Davidic covenant, to belief-based religion. The covenant is a covenant of doing, not a covenant of believing. But you couldn't do under Rome, or you'd get in trouble. Or better said, you couldn't abstain from doing in Rome without getting in trouble. So if you didn't go out to the Moloch festival, you were in trouble and you were persecuted. So how do you get around that? Paul, it doesn't matter what you do. It matters what you believe. It doesn't matter that you're worshiping false idols. It doesn't matter that you're celebrating pagan festivals. It doesn't matter that you're going into pagan temples. It doesn't matter that you're eating pagan meat, sacrificed to pagan idols, and making contracts with demons. None of that matters. It just matters what you believe. So now, all you Christians don't have to worry about doing anything. You don't have to worry about the covenant anymore and the rules of keeping your covenant. All you have to worry about is do what the emperor tells you and just don't believe it. And you're good. So that Christians didn't have to stick out like a sore thumb and stand in conviction and follow their covenant and their 10 commandments, Paul got rid of the 10 commandments and said, don't worry about those. As long as you believe, you can do things outside of the Davidic covenant. That's what Paul did. So Paul laid the groundwork for Constantine's reform and the institutional weaponization of Paul's belief-based doctrine rather than obedience. If you obeyed Jesus, you could not follow Roman law period. Okay? Ritual sacrifice was expected. You had to. Okay? Roman law was all about ritual, not belief. They didn't give a shit if you believed in whatever entity you were sacrificing to. In Roman law, religious tolerance was pragmatic. Okay? The empire didn't care what god or gods you believed in, as long as you participated in public rituals, especially the sacrifices to the state gods. What are state gods? Well, every Roman emperor came in and had their pet mascot god, right? So whichever mascot they chose to be the one, that's who you had to offer sacrifice to. And of course, the emperor themselves, because the emperors were also godmen. So you had to sacrifice to and for the emperor, and you had to sacrifice to and for the emperor's chosen gods. And as long as you did that, you were okay. They didn't care if you believed in the emperor's god or not. Just get out there to the Moloch temple and do your civic duty. They didn't ask you what you believed in. They asked, hey, were they at the festival or not? And if not, we're arresting them because they didn't perform the ritual. If you didn't perform the ritual, you're out of bounds. That's how Roman law worked. It's unfathomable to today's Americans and today's Christians because it's so heavily belief-based. That was not Roman religion. Roman pagan religions was not about belief.
What I say, they can say whatever the hell they want to say, and they know it.
It was about doing things, having sex at the temple, serving your time as a temple hooker. Okay, that's what you had to do. Eating the meat at the festival, sacrificing to the gods and goddesses, paying your taxes, showing up at the emperor's birthday celebration when they closed down the whole city for the God-Man Emperor's festival. You better fucking be there. You better eat the meat. You better sacrifice the food. You better do your time in the temples. That's what Roman law was. They don't care if the temple hookers believed it or not. They cared that they were spreading their legs. Okay, that's what they cared about. They didn't care if the young men were castrating themselves, believed in the goddess they were castrating themselves to. They didn't. That's not how the Greeks were. That's not how the Romans were. Okay? They were running around with their little concubine boys. They didn't care what they believed. They cared what they did. Stick your ass up in the air. That's what we care about. Do it. Don't care if you believe it. Okay? Hello, Greeks. Sorry to get graphic, but seriously, guys, come on. They didn't give a shit what you believe. They gave a shit what you did. So as long as you didn't disrupt imperial unity or refuse to honor the emperor's divine status, you were good. You had to avoid exclusive loyalty to any one deity that remotely undermined Roman pluralism. So bye-bye Jesus's father. That's exclusive. Jesus's father is exclusive. Jesus's father demands loyalty. And the covenant laws are not difficult for Americans in 2025. They were extremely difficult for people under the Roman Empire back in the day. People don't imagine that. So it shifted to belief because they didn't want to get killed. So when someone comes along and goes, don't worry about it. Just believe. What a perfect thing for Paul to say in all of these Greek and Roman temples and these pagan temples. That's exactly what they wanted to hear. You mean I can believe in something wonderful without getting in trouble by the Romans? Because I did my prostitute shift over at the fucking fertility temple? As long as I don't believe it, I'm good? Yeah, it was beautiful what Paul did. But it wasn't covenant. was beautiful for them. They didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to put themselves at risk to stand up for their covenant. So how this impacts both the Sabbath and idol food, well, they're the same doctrine. Compromising with the food sacrifice to idol thing is the same line of thinking that compromised the Sabbath. Sabbath observance was visible, behavioral marker of covenant loyalty. And under Roman law, it was tolerated until it became exclusive or defiant. So if you refuse to sacrifice to my gods, now you're in trouble. Keep the Sabbath all you want. Just do all the other holidays too, which is exactly what Paul taught. So eating food sacrificed to idols, this was routine. This was normal program in Roman civic life. This wasn't choice. This was law. You better get out there and eat the fucking Moloch meat. It was a law. So Paul's permissiveness was sort of offering a legal loophole. Well, you can eat the demon meat. Just don't offend anybody with it. Just keep it on the down low. Because God forbid you go against Rome and stand up for the Davidic covenant. We don't do that. We compromise. James and Jesus, by contrast, they upheld those boundaries. They held the line. And they rejected any sort of Balaam-style compromise. Sorry, not sorry. So, Paul's theology, completely aligned with Roman legal pragmatism, belief over behavior, and conscience over covenant. That's why it was tolerated and celebrated. And now we've got a bunch of pagan Romans telling us what the Bible means. That's how we got here. So we've read 6:1 through 6:11. We didn't really dissect it very much, but at least we got our Sabbath issues and Paul and the Sabbath out of the way. So next time, we'll be talking about David's bread. The key of David, the bread of the presence and the harvest that Jesus was walking through. And of course, why does he keep saying he's the Son of Man? We'll see if we can figure those out next. And happy Sabbath.
Energy. 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 You cannot fuck with this. Energy. You cannot fuck with this energy. Doodles in the flesh. All of those who are listening, don't miss the message judging me. You cannot fuck with this energy.